Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. This is Zorik Pirvasian, Planning and Rules Manager with South Coast AQMD. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items, if I may. For those of you attending, please place your cell phone on silent or vibrate mode. In terms of our restroom locations, they're located down the hallway across the auditorium entrance. And in case of emergencies, if you hear an evacuation notice, if an evacuation is called, please exit the building through the exit doors at the back of the auditorium. If a shelter in place is necessary, such as in the event of an earthquake, please drop, cover your head, and hold on to your chair. But we'll notify you if anything like that ever comes up. God willing, it will not happen. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So this is the public consultation meeting for the facility-based measure for commercial airports. Just making sure everybody's in the right meeting here. I wanted to, first of all, introduce staff who is behind me before we proceed.
So my name is Sarah Reese. I'm the Assistant Deputy Executive Officer for Planning in the District.
Sengmi Lee, Program Supervisor.
Megan Lorenz, I'm in the General Counsel's office.
And we have other AQMD staff who have been heavily involved in developing the MOUs and our staff report. So just a way of background, as you know, since May of last year, when our board directed staff to develop MOUs with commercial airports, we have been working very hard with all the 5 commercial airports in this process through the MOU working group. After significant discussions and effort, airports have proceeded in developing their own individual air quality improvement plans and air quality improvement measures that basically provide the basis of the draft MOUs that we're presenting to you today. A lot of work has gone into it by airports, their consultants, our own staff. We want to thank the airports again for all their efforts in preparing the air quality plans and the measures that they've developed. Again, as I said, are the basis of the MOUs that we're presenting today. So today we're going to provide a presentation on the whole measure and where we're going next. And there will be a period for public comments, and I'll provide some closing remarks at the end. I'll ask Sangmi to come and give the presentation on the facility-based measure for commercial airports.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us today public consultation meeting for the facility-based mobile source measure for commercial airports. So as Zorik introduced briefly, this facility-based mobile source measure for commercial airport is a part of the mobile source measures described in the 2016 AQMP. So the 2016 AQMP include various types of mobile source measures, including on-road sources, off-road sources, incentive-based approaches, and facility-based measures. There are 5 types of facility-based mobile source measures. They are new and the redevelopment project, and the one targeting marine ports, and then rail yards, warehouse distribution centers, and then MOB-04 is targeting commercial airports. In May 2018, the South Coast AQMD's governing board directed staff the specific approaches to pursue facility-based mobile source measures. For airports, the governing board directed the staff to pursue voluntary approach based on MOUs. That is why we are here, and then that describes the efforts that has been undertaken in past past year or more. There are the regulations that affects the commercial airports operations, and that includes both the regulations from South Coast AQMD and then California Air Resources Board. South Coast AQMD rules primarily including the fleet rules, so-called fleet rules. It includes Rule 1191 and 96, which requires the the on-road mobile sources to use low-emission gasoline vehicles or alternative fuel vehicles when they belong to government fleet. And also there is Rule 1194 that targeting commercial airports ground access vehicles to be low emission or alt fuel equipments. There are multiple regulations that are initiated and maintained by ARB. There is the MOU that targeting ground support equipment. It's signed in 2002 and then is practically terminated in 2006 when the new regulations basically replacing the targets that the MOU had. And then there are in-use diesel fuel fleets that targeting both the off-road and then on-road heavy-duty diesel vehicles. Both requires to use cleaner engines and then low-emission vehicles. There is also large spark ignition regulations targeting the kind of gasoline vehicles. In addition to these existing regulations, there are new and upcoming regulations, and then this zero-emission airport to shuttle program has adopted June of this year, and that requires airport to shuttles to be zero emission at least by 33%, 66%, and 100% in year 2027 and 31 and 35 respectively. Another rule that closely related with commercial airport is zero-emission airport ground support equipment. This rule is currently under development and is scheduled for board consideration in late 2020. The goal is currently 100% zero emission by 2032. So there are regulations that already existed and then upcoming that targeting the emission reductions from commercial airport operations. However, the NOx reduction required to attain federal ozone standard in South Coast Air Basin is significant. So further, the reductions through this new strategy is necessary to attain the federal standard. That's why we are doing this MOU-based approach to achieve additional emission reductions. And then MOU is basically voluntary agreement between South Coast AQMD and commercial airports. So the goal is to achieve SIP creditable emission reductions. There are 5 commercial airports located within the South Coast Air Basin that are included in the MOU, which are as depicted in this diagram. The Los Angeles International Airport, John Wayne and Ontario International, Burbank Airport, and Long Beach Airport. I forgot to mention that some of these slides are kind of repeated information for those who has been participating in the working group meeting. However, this is the first of the public consultation meeting, and then some of the people are, for some of the people, this is the first time to meet this type of information. So this presentation pretty much covers the entire kind of the process of the MOU and the goals of MOUs. So again, as I mentioned, this MOU development was through the public process. There are different forms of a public process we have undertaken in the past year or so. First, the working group meetings. There has been 3 working group meetings since the beginning of this year, and then another one is actually scheduled in this coming Tuesday. And then also there is a South Coast Air Quality Management District's governing board meetings, and the governing board has this committee meetings, specifically Mobile Source Committee had this airport approaches updated presentation multiple times. And public consultation meeting, that is today's meeting. In addition to this, South Coast AQMD is a public process. The airports, each airport also has its own public process to kind of adopt their AQIPs or AQIM and MOUs by their respective authority. And lastly, each MOU is also subject to the approval of South Coast AQMD's governing board, which is scheduled to be December of this year. So this slide describes the steps that has taken to develop this draft MOUs. There are kind of 3 steps. The very first step was developing AQIP, which stands for Air Quality Improvement Plan, or some airports call AQIM, Air Quality Improvement Measures. So the very first step is each airport to develop its own blueprint or its own plan to achieve emission reductions from their operation, from targeting non-aircraft emission sources. And then based on the AQIP or AQIM, draft MOU has been developed. The South Coast AQMD jointly worked with the commercial airports to develop the draft MOUs. The last step is to get SIP credits. The goal of this whole process is a SIP creditable emission reduction. So South Coast AQMD is working with the US EPA to get the SIP credits from the implementation of the measures identified in AQIP/AQIM. Among them, those are eligible for SIP credits. We will have more discussions what the requirements is to be eligible for SIP credit. And then another thing is, if emission reductions the expected from the implementation of these measures not fully achieved, then South Coast AQMD provides subsidy measures to remedy the potential shortfall. So again, as mentioned, the MOU is the agreement between two parties. So this slide describes the commitment made by the two parties. So airports agreed to implement the AQIP and AQIM measures that are included in the MOU by working with their own tenants. And then another important piece is airports agreed to provide annual reports to South Coast AQMD on the progress on the implementation of their measures. This will include more specified detailed data such as equipment data and equipment inventories, and then emission benefits calculation. So on the other side, the South Coast AQMD also make this multiple commitments to get the SIP credit. The first, South Coast AQMD quantifies the SIP creditable emission reductions from the measures that are satisfying EPA's guideline to be SIP creditable. And South Coast AQMD will provide federally enforceable commitments to US EPA and then provide emission reduction benefits to EPA. And South Coast AQMD also will establish the matrix to track the progress of the implementation, and also will develop the subsidy measures to cover potential shortfall if needed, and also provide public access and disclosure of all the emission benefit calculation and the process of this getting SIP credits. This slide describes the emission sources included in AQIP/AQIM. So AQIP targets non-aircraft mobile sources associated with airport operation that are under direct control of airport authority or can be influenced by the airport through their agreement or lease or permits. The categories include our ground support equipment, and then heavy-duty trucks such as delivery truck, off-road equipment, and then the on-road passenger employee transportation. And then based on these emission source types, the measures to reduce the emissions are developed by each airport. Those we call it AQIP and AQIM measures. These measures vary from airport to airport. That reflects the unique situation of each airport has. For example, some airport is going through renovation of a terminal, and some airport has very strict regulations on noise control, etc. So the measures vary among airports. However, all five, the AQIP/AQIM has common components or common measures that are targeting emission reductions from GSE and airport-owned fleet, and an improvement in passenger traffic and infrastructure. Since each airport has its own unique circumstances, the performance targets varies among airports as well. But all 5 AQIPs and AQIM provides emission benefits from the implementation of such measures. The years we are targeting in this process are primarily 2023 and 2031, which are the federal ozone standards attainment deadlines. And each AQIP and AQIM provides the emissions inventory for those 2 milestone years, and then they're starting from, and which are projected from the base year 2017, and then they included the benefits of the AQIP, AQIM measures. This is, but as I mentioned briefly in this presentation so far, there are requirements set by US EPA for the emission reductions to be SIP creditable. They are these 6 categories presented in this slides. So integrity elements has multiple components, so we'll have more discussions in next slide. But then second one is federal enforceability. What that means is the emission reductions needs to have the components that the reduction needs to be available, and the commitment to monitor and assess and then report the emission reductions. And it also requires, federal enforceability also requires a commitment to submit substitute measures to remedy potential shortfall if needed. Technical support is rather straightforward. What that means is the emission reductions and all the calculations provided in this SIP credit calculation needs to have the methodology and assumptions and data that are well established and then reliable, and then how those data are actually used to translate into SIP credit. So basically technical documentation and support requirement. The next one is funding. So funding is mostly if the emission reductions are achieved through incentive funding program. If it is incentive funding program, the funding needs to be committed or reasonably expected to be available. And there is a measure that one of the airports committed to spend $500,000 incentive funding to accelerate turnover to the cleaner trucks. So in that case, the funding they required to implement the measures already committed and approved, and actually even the recipients of the fundings are already selected. The legal authority is, AQMD has the legal authority to enter the MOU with the commercial airport to achieve emission reductions that are necessary to attain the federal standards based on California's the health and safety code. Public disclosure and tracking information is the data that the data and emission benefits calculated under this process needs to be publicly available, fully publicly available, and then available to EPA. So these quite comprehensive requirements is set by EPA for emission reduction to be SIP creditable. And this slide explains the components that the EPA's integrity elements require. So there are 4 elements. One is a surplus. What that means is the emission reductions needs to be above and beyond the current level of regulation set by local or state or federal governments. Permanency is the emission reductions to be achieved needs to stay permanent throughout the terms of the MOU or set time frame. Quantifiable means emission reductions are calculated with reliable and replicable method. So anybody, EPA or others, can replicate the reduction calculation. And all the analysis involved in the calculation needs to be documented and substantiated as well. Enforceable here, it is a little different from federal enforceability in the previous slide. Here, enforceable means the information here is publicly available and independently verifiable. So let's say we commit emission reduction of 0.5 ton of NOx emission, then that exact calculation and numbers needs to be can be reproduced by anybody, by others, based on the information provided in this process. And the program violation has to be defined. So those are the definition of this EPA's integrity element for the emission reduction to be SIP creditable. So based on these requirements and categories, we identified the measures listed in AQIP to be, take it back. So we identified the measures that are SIP creditable among those measures listed in AQIP, AQIMs. So AQIPs actually have quite multiple list of measures that airports plan to implement to improve air quality, to reduce emissions. However, not all of them are SIP creditable due to the requirements set by EPA and discussed in previous slides. So MOU includes only those that are eligible for SIP credits. And also MOU established the matrix to quantify the emission benefits associated with those SIP creditable measures. And then the airport's requirement to report such progress to South Coast AQMD. And next two slides actually list the measures that were identified as a SIP creditable. So again, as I mentioned, actually airports AQIP has a longer list of measures, but these are the measures that are identified as a SIP creditable. So LAX has 3 measures. The first one, GSE, second, Alternative Fuel Vehicle Incentive Program. That's the incentive program I mentioned in the previous slides. And the third one is the Clean Fleet Program that targets the airport's own the bus fleets. Another thing to mention here is the GSE measure are common in all 5 airports, so it repeats in next slides as well. However, the performance targets vary. And the Burbank has 2 measures. Again, the GSE measure, that's the same, similar to other airports, but the performance targets are different. And the zero emission shuttle bus program, similar to the LAWA's fleet program, but this is specifically targeting for the shuttle bus. The John Wayne Airport did 3 programs, 3 measures that are SIP creditable. The first one is GSE, similar to the previous GSE measures. And then the second one is jet fuel delivery trucks. Actually, this is meaning that eliminating the jet fuel delivery trucks by installing the pipelines that deliver the fuel to the aircrafts. And the third one is parking shuttle bus electrification program, similar to the previous 2 airports, the zero emission fleet program. Long Beach has the GSE measure, but the performance target is 0.93 and 0.44 gram per horsepower hour, gram per brake horsepower per hour in 2020 and 2031 respectively. Long Beach actually has the lowest, the most aggressive, the GSE performance target. Ontario has the GSE target as listed here. So these measures are SIP creditable. So the next step is calculating SIP credits. So when you are calculating SIP credits, the whole currency has to be SIP emission currency. However, the emissions inventory or emissions benefits included in AQIP are not necessarily identical to AQMP inventory. AQMP inventory, that is basically the same as a SIP inventory. Due to the various reasons listed here, for example, AQMP uses top-down approach while AQIP uses bottom-up, and then AQMP uses much older data vintage because it has been developed several years ago, while AQIP uses newer data sets since it is just being finished developed, still draft stage. And then in the meantime, also mobile source emission model that calculate the emissions from the on-road sources has been updated as well. So what this means is reconciliation of these 2 data sets are necessary to come up with the SIP credits. And next to this slide describes very briefly, extremely briefly, how this reconciliation was made. The first, the GSE measure. So we used the more kind of simplest but more consistent methodology, the methodology that is more consistent to the AQMP in the way that the differences between AQMP baseline and then airport's projection that reflects the implementation of AQIP measures. Reflect that implementation of AQIP measures, the difference of those two were considered as a SIP creditable emission reduction. For LAX's alternative fuel vehicle incentive measure, to calculate emission reductions from this measure, we utilized the CAR MOU program guideline to get the vehicles, the deterioration rate and the near zero emission vehicles emission factors. And then we applied those information to the vehicle data provided by the LAX to come up with the SIP credits. The third one is the zero emission bus program. So this, the three airports, Lawa, John Wayne, and Burbank has this program similar to each other, but the methodologies to come up with the SIP credits were consistent. And the methodologies were the same, so it is listed as one item that uses AQMP's vehicle average emission factor applied to VMT provided by airports. And jet fuel delivery truck measure is very, very similar. The AQMP is the truck average emission factor applied to the VMT of the jet fuel delivery truck, of which VMT will be eliminated by installation of the fuel pipeline. So utilizing this method, this table summarizes the SIP creditable emission reductions. And then it's color-coded by airport and by measure, and the LAX GSE measure apparently offers the biggest emission reduction among all the measures due to the high amount of the activities and size of the airport. But all these three, but the fleet program and then incentive program emission reductions as described here, and then all three and the other airports' SIP creditable emission reductions are also described here in this table. When you add up all of them, that comes up with this table, 0.52 tons per day of NOx emission reduction in 2023 and 0.38 in 2031. So based on these calculations, the South Coast AQMD is making federally enforceable commitment. The first one, we commit to achieve this 0.52 and 0.38 tons of NOx emission in 2023 and 2031 based on the airport's commitment of the implementing those measures. And then South Coast AQMD will track the airport's implementation of those measures and then report those data to, let me take it back. So South Coast AQMD is will track the airport's implementation of such measures based on the report that the airports will provide to South Coast AQMD every year. South Coast AQMD will also report such emission reductions to EPA. That includes detailed data and then emission benefit calculation. Lastly, if needed, South Coast AQMD will adopt and submit substitute measures to EPA in the event of a potential shortfall of this emission reduction, but through the public process. And also, we explain how these measures satisfies the EPA's integrity elements, that for example, surplusness. It's all the emission reductions to be achieved through this implementation of the measures are above and beyond the current regulation. And secondly, permanency, the emission reductions from these measures will occur throughout the terms of MOU, which is 2031, so that it complies with the permanency requirement. And quantifiable, so emission reductions will be calculated with the methodology that are consistent with the SIP AQMP, and the methodologies also will be clearly documented and available for public review. Lastly, enforceability. So these emission reductions to be achieved through these measures will be annually annually monitored, assessed, and the emission reductions can be verified by EPA or by others based on the data provided to us, and then that will be provided to the public through the public data the process. So we are up to here, and the next we still have a couple of steps to go more. The first one is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there is one more working group meeting that's scheduled this upcoming Tuesday. And this AQIPs and draft MOUs need to be adopted by airport's respective authority sometime in November. And South Coast AQMD's governing board considered the adoption of this, the MOUs, and then enforceable commitment in December board meeting, which is scheduled in December 6th. But then there is a San Bernardino Airport. Currently, the evaluation of the we are evaluating the potential development of the San Bernardino Airport. And then lastly, the staff report is currently available for public review, and then the public comments is due in October 21st. That's the Monday, 2 weeks later. So this concludes my presentation today.
Thank you, Sang-Mi. Just a couple of things to add to Sang-Mi's presentation. I just wanted to highlight the fact and acknowledge that the air quality improvement plans and the measures that the airports have developed, not all of them are included in the MOUs. As you've seen from Sang-Mi's presentation, we've only selected a few that we thought they are potentially SIP creditable and meeting the criteria that EPA has for us. But the actual AQIPs and measures actually include a lot more measures that the airports have proposed, ranging from upgrading their fleet to zero-emission equipment, either both on-road and off-road, clean construction policies, measures to improve transportation and reduce perhaps PMT or emissions. But because these reductions, the reductions from these measures either are not quantifiable, example for the clean construction policy, or they're already reflected in the AQMP's baseline inventory. That's why they are not included in MOUs. But we do want to highlight the fact that airports are doing a lot more than the measures that are in the MOUs right now. Just want to acknowledge that, and also highlight again that the facility-based mobile source measures that we're taking to our board essentially includes two components. One is the draft, all the draft MOUs that we prepared for each of the 5 commercial airports, and the second part is our enforceable commitment. As Sang-Mi mentioned, these are the reductions that the AQMD is committing to achieve and address any potential shortfall in the future. And as again Sang-Mi mentioned, we are asking for comments by October 21st. These MOUs are still draft. We're asking for comments from the public. We're also asking the airports to not adopt their MOUs until we go through our public review process, which closes end of this month, for opportunity to receive comments from everyone. And then airports would be able to consider approval of their MOUs in November timeframe, and our board will consider approval in December. Anything else? I think basically that's just a couple of additions I wanted to add. Now we're just going to open it up for comments. Those of you who wish to make comments, please come to the microphone, and then maybe raise your hand. I'll ask you to come forward. If you could introduce yourselves and appreciate it.
Good morning. My name is Matthew Taylor. I'm actually a member of the AB 617 Steering Committee in San Bernardino, Musquay area. I'm a longtime resident of the Inland Region, born and raised in San Bernardino. 6 months ago, I was in this room pleading with the board about the indirect source rule. I'm here again just to make a plea because our air quality is of the utmost importance. I said, we know that air transport is quickly growing as a leading source of emissions, and we must have the AQMD set strong rules for Ontario. Ontario is one of the areas that needs attention, but I also don't want you all to forget about San Bernardino. We need our local airports to consider the health of the people in its surrounding areas. We also need them to hold themselves accountable and set goals yearly that will reduce the amount of emissions aircrafts release into the air every day. I believe that zero-emission aircrafts and airport vehicles is a possibility, and I know that there is growth and great potential that can happen when we see our interconnections and work together to reduce our damaging footprints in our environment and from our air quality. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I think as Sangli mentioned, we're following the development of the San Bernardino Airport. As you would see from the measures that we included in the MOUs, they primarily focused on ground support equipment. And based on the proposals that we have received from the airport, San Bernardino Airport, looks like they're going after 100% electrification, except for maybe a couple of categories. So they're a lot more stringent actually than some of our commercial airports because they're starting from whatever baseline they have their equipment at. In terms of other categories that the airports are operating, obviously, the aircraft is under the federal jurisdiction. But I also understand that some airports are working with their tenants and their airlines to try to hopefully achieve some reductions from various types of operations. But they're not included in MOUs because they're not essentially enforceable. And as far as trucks, heavy-duty trucks that visit the airports, they will be covered in our indirect source rule that is currently being developed by warehouses and distribution centers. So all the facilities that are operating within the airport will be covered under that ISR. But thank you for your comments. Appreciate it.
Please excuse my voice. I think I'm getting sick. So good afternoon, board and community. My name is Angie Belarus. I'm a longtime resident of the Inland Region. I'm going a little over 2 decades. I currently live between the airports of Redlands and San Bernardino, where my community and surrounding communities are affected by emissions due to mobile polluters, warehouses, railroads, airports, and other industry. As someone who spends most of their time in Ontario, where I work with many orgs, community, and schools, I see the health effects it has impacted within the constituents of San Bernardino and Ontario and surrounding areas. So it brings me much concern, not only for myself, my loved ones, and communities I work alongside here in Ontario and San Bernardino, that if the airports plan to expand, I hope that they think about the pollution it will add to the region, which is already the leader and champion of bad air quality. So I hope AQMD keeps community and their health as their #1 priority. I hope the airports lead the way in zero emissions. As someone who is here to uplift the voices of many constituents in the surrounding area who could not be here today because they don't have the privilege of being paid to be here or being able to skip out on work or school today to attend this meeting that is purposely held at times and days when it's not convenient for a community. I demand to know the impacted areas for the communities living close by the airports as of now, as to include the potential add-on impacts if the Ontario Airport chooses to expand. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Lisa Triphala Consulting, and I work with a number of airports. We wanted to say thank you publicly to the staff and to the council. We know you guys have been you worked really hard to get to this point. We've worked in a collaborative way. Obviously, we appreciate that you recognize that the airport's air quality improvement plans are more comprehensive. That's what's in the MOU. And we look forward to continuing to lead the way in air quality improvement. And we just wanted to thank you for the record to have gotten to us to this point together. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
So good morning. In case I haven't met any of the staff, my name is Carla Dela Cruz. I am with the Sierra Club. I want to thank staff for working diligently. I think I can safely say that I've been to all the working group meetings and all the meetings related to the airport MOU process for 2019. So I just want to share a few comments. I want to thank the staff for making the MOUs available online prior to this meeting. I did have the chance to read them in depth and also read the staff accompanying report. They're really illuminating, but I do have to say, if one were to approach the documents for the first time without reading the 2016 AQMP and without understanding the larger context of all the things that this agency is doing, they would read these documents, and I think they would come away with some of the same concerns that I have today, because it does not go far enough to be able to really demonstrate that this agency is doing all it can do as a partnership with the airports to be able to achieve attainment and to achieve NOx reductions by the 2023 and 2031 deadlines. And I want to touch upon a few things that seem to resonate between all the MOUs. The first is the enforceability of SIP credits. So during the presentation, unless I heard otherwise, there seem to be two different definitions of enforceability for SIP credits. One is the federal enforceability, and the other is how we're meant to enforce the SIP reductions through the MOUs, which is publicly available data and verifiable results. That is one way we can understand if these reductions are happening, but I do not think it fulfills the intent of enforceability for SIP credits, because SIPs, or state implementation plans, at their heart are meant to be public documents and are meant to be enforceable by citizens, everyday citizens, not just regional air quality districts. And so if there is the ability for everyday citizens like myself to be able to enforce the SIP credibility of these reductions, please demonstrate that either in the language or in the presentation. How are members of the public meant to be able to enforce these reductions in a proactive way, or at least in a real-time way, and one that does not have the type of legality delay that we can often so see with these types of plans. And that brings me to the second point, which is the shortfall. So it's clear that the AQMD is still taking the responsibility for all the emission reduction shortfalls, and that it's not on the airports. But really what concerns me is essentially the vagueness in which what will happen after the shortfall if it occurs. And it seems to really go back to this black box mentality, which there are these contingency plans that we, the public, are not aware of that will somehow magically make up the shortfall that we may not get as a result of these MOUs. And that is, it looks like magic. So unless we're betting on the future technology that does not yet exist, please tell us how the contingency plan is existing for the shortfall, or better yet, while we're going through this process, can we develop a potential rule that may be the backstop if their shortfall does apply, and that you can bring to the board as a consideration for essentially an ISR on the airports? I know that's a dirty word in here, but I think as an even shortfall backstop, that should be considered. Take my time because I'm not limited by 3 minutes as I usually am. And lastly, I want to focus on some of the airports themselves. So I think LAX is a leader in this field. They're doing a great job in really demonstrating how, by setting goals and setting fleet turnover benchmarks, you can really not only do the internal planning, but also send the signal to your vendors and your operators that you have this intention. We don't see that same type of goal setting in the other airports, and I want to push the other airports to have 100% either zero emission or electrification goal, especially goals that coincide with the important dates that we know are before this agency, 2023, 35, 31. But with LAX, excuse me, I left my water outside. With LAX, the question is, the plan is great, but does it go beyond what CEQA mitigation requires? And does it also go beyond what prior CBAs also require of LAX? And if it does, then great, but please demonstrate that either in the MOU or in the presentation. And with Ontario, as you already said, Zurich, the trucks are a big part of it. So if the cargo facilities that are loading the airplanes are also going to be handled as the same as a warehouse under the WARE program, I think we just want that laid out, because we definitely see the cargo terminals essentially the same as the intermodal terminals for a rail yard or a seaport. So a lot of this will be in a letter. We'll submit it before the end of the month. We just want to thank again staff and for making this opportunity available. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo. I guess we'll try to attempt to respond to some of your comments. Maybe I'll start, and then Megan and Sarah and others. So in terms of the enforceability, you're right. There's two enforceability components. One is emission reductions have to be enforceable to meet the EPA's integrity element, right? So that's the first one. And the way we said we demonstrate it is by the fact that airports provide annual reports that specify the equipment data at equipment level. They provide quantification of emissions, and we provide formulas that members of the public can follow, actually replicate the calculation. So all that will be posted and verifiable by members of the public. Then there's the other enforceability, as Sangmi mentioned, is the federal enforceability that district is committing to the enforceable, committing to achieve the tonnage of reductions. Airports are not. Airports are committing or agreeing to implement these measures. We are committing to achieve the reductions based on airports' agreement to implement these measures. So really, it's a voluntary agreement. Airports agreeing to do something, and we are quantifying the benefits. If they don't, we're not going to get reductions. And obviously, we're going to come back to the board and say it's not happening. But this is really a voluntary agreement between between AQMD and each airport, and both parties are agreeing to fulfill their obligations. And if it doesn't happen, obviously, we have to come back and say so. And on that part, Megan, you wanted to add a little bit.
Yeah, and just your point about citizens' ability to enforce. So the point of our enforceable commitment is, while you can't enforce it against the airports, it does give citizens an ability to enforce against us if the reductions aren't met.
Yeah. And in terms of the shortfall, again, obviously, we're hoping there won't be a shortfall. Obviously, we're hoping that we will exceed even the reductions that are being calculated based on airports' actions. We're hoping that we exceed and go above and beyond what's in there. But in case there's a shortfall, again, we hope that's not going to happen. We're outlining a process that come to the public process again. And in fact, EPA wants us to develop substitute measures before the attainment date, and try to develop it before then, so that we can submit it and implement it. So we're committed to that process, and obviously we're gonna. I think we need to explain it a little bit better in the staff report if we need to, so to make it more clear what the process would look like, and I think we're also going to make it more clear that the cargo facilities that are operated within the airports will be subject to the ISR that is currently being developed by warehouses. A couple of airports are proposing to implement incentive-based measures currently that we are quantifying and they're part of our reductions. But as a requirement, they would be addressed under the ISR.
And I just want to touch on something that Zorik mentioned, Mike, in terms of the shortfall. We have every expectation that we're going to reach the targets that we have outlined in the MOU. We're not thinking that we're going to need to go back and evaluate that shortfall, but we have to have that plan in place in the event that something beyond the control of either of the parties results in us not being able to get those emission reductions. But to Zorik's additional point, EPA will require us to actually have substitute measures that we put in place, because they don't just take our word for it in terms of those SIP credits that we're claiming. So that's something that will be worked out in a public process.
You don't realize how short you are until you get up to a podium. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christiana Fadul. I'm here with the Sierra Club this morning, and I just wanted to say that I'm very thankful to be here in front of you all today. But unfortunately, a lot of the community is not, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. If you will, I would like to offer a few bits of constructive criticism to this public consultation meeting and to meetings in the future, because unfortunately, there is not community here, and we need to involve the public. I do media for a living. I know what it's like to have community show up to these events, and I know what it's like to see community be involved. And unfortunately, there are only 5 of us here today. We're not representative of the majority of Southern California, and I don't think it's right that others cannot be here. So instead of having a meeting out here in Diamond Bar on a Thursday morning when most people are at work, are at school, are taking care of their children, I urge you all to find a creative way of becoming more involved with the community. There has to be a more effective way than a PowerPoint that is driven and very heavy with data. There has to be a way that we can break this down, talk to community on a person-by-person basis, get their opinions, and make it so they can feel confident to be involved in these meetings. So that's really all I wanted to come up here and urge you all to do today. This is a public consultation meeting, and I don't see the public, and I would like to see that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Appreciate that. I think that just say related to that comment, that's something we kind of struggle at times to get the public more involved, and because of the timing constraints that we're all under. But we really appreciate your involvement, and in a way we're hearing your comments. I think in so many ways you're representing the public in different ways that we don't hear otherwise from the business or other sectors. So we appreciate your participation. But we agree that we still need to improve our outreach. Thank you. Anybody else? If there's no one else, we just want to thank you again for coming to the meeting today. We will have another airport working group meeting on Tuesday. You're all welcome to come. I think it's more of a continuation of the dialogue that we've had. There's still things that we still need to refine in the MOUs, and nothing is final yet. We want to hear more from everyone. We would really appreciate if you could submit your comments as soon as possible, so that we can coordinate it with the airports and incorporate it into the MOUs, and go through the process. But as the schedule Sangmi outlined, we are going to also to our Mobile Source Committee on the 18th, which is a week from tomorrow. We will be presenting this item to our Mobile Source Committee as well at that time. With that, thank you very much, and thanks for your participation. Have a great day.